Hi, I'm David Marchant, the founder of OffshoreAlert, which investigates participants in high-value cross-border finance with an emphasis on high-confidentiality jurisdictions. Our specialty is exposing investment fraud while it's in progress. Enjoy our content.
Hi, everyone. I would like to welcome you to this session, which we call the use of artificial intelligence to locate hidden bank accounts. My name is Bob Duffield. I'm Executive Chairman of Greylist Trace Limited, and I would like to introduce you to my fellow panelists. We have Joey Friedmann of LDM Global and Joe Sremack of BDO. And the plan is this. We're each going to outline our commercial involvement in AI and asset tracing for 10 minutes or so, which should leave sufficient time at the end of the session to broaden the discussion and take some questions. And both Joes have kindly agreed that I should go first. So thank you. Let's face it. Criminals are smart, often very smart, well-resourced and well-organized. Many of them are at the cutting edge of the technological cyber arms race that fueled cybercrime and digital fraud. State regulators often find themselves on the back foot when it comes to following, tracking down, and recovering the money. The bad guys are highly motivated. The annual global financial crime bill has been estimated at around $1.45 trillion. They break the law with impunity and then use the law to protect themselves and their ill-gotten gains. So by definition, asset tracing is time-consuming, expensive, and all too often mission impossible. The phrase throwing good money after bad haunts our industry. So when many millions have gone missing, clients can be tempted to fight fire with fire by hiring investigators who are prepared to break the law. People from the dark side are available for hire to breach banking secrecy in order to steal private account information. You don't have to look very far to find hackers and blaggers who claim they can reach inside the global banking system in return for a fat fee. I'm afraid to say that illegal asset tracing is the elephant in our room. I bump into this pachyderm at the most prestigious conferences sponsored by blue chip law firms and forensic accountants. I deduce that the elephant wanders among us for a reason. In 1999, I set up Y Limited, a pioneer corporate intelligence agency specializing in digital investigations and data mining. And for the last 20 years or so, Y Limited has been at the cutting edge of cyber technological innovation and security. Every fourth Friday afternoon, we used to hold informal brainstorming sessions in the office. These end-of-the-month seminars combined blue sky thinking with a sprinkle of lateral left field ideas. And I remember one session in 2013 where I suddenly blurted out what in the past would have been called the $64,000 question, a question so difficult and complex to answer that it borders on the unthinkable. And given inflation and the high stakes of the global asset recovery sector, I reckon this has now become the $64 billion question. So with a glass of Cabernet Sauvignon in my hand, I posed this highly specific question. Hold on, guys, I asked. Can we develop digital technology to track down hidden accounts in the global banking system without breaking the law? And I asked the question casually, almost flippantly, without any expectation of an answer. It turns out that this brainstorming session was the seed of a technical solution so powerful that it would grow to change the world of asset tracing. 7 years on, and with over 300,000 proof of concept trials under our belt, I can confirm that we have developed machine intelligent technology that can legally track down bank accounts. It's called the Greylist Algorithm. And for once, this new technology is on the side of the angels. The technology specifically designed to cast new light into dark places. Greylist is a system that was invented to tackle fraud, money laundering, corruption, tax evasion, and all-round bad behavior. We obtain our intelligence through a process that combines computation, deduction, and inference. And I guess both Joes will pick up on this. I guess this is precisely what algorithms are designed to do. Okay, so how does it work? Email addresses are universally used to register bank accounts. We have built and maintain a global database of banks, pretty much every bank and branch in the world. The Greylist algorithm can legally ascertain if an email address has been in contact with a bank, and not just any part of the bank. I'm talking here about the sections that deal solely with transactions and account management. So clients supply us with target email addresses of suspects or defendants or POIs, which we turn into digital code for dispatch to every bank in the world. The Greylist algorithm calculates which banks have whitelisted the target email address. This calculation takes place at the spam filters protecting every bank in the world. Incoming emails are whitelisted if and only if they are recognized by the spam filter for immediate acceptance into the email server. If a target email address has been whitelisted, there is a 98% probability that it was used to open an account at that bank. So it is vital that you understand that the algorithm does not illegally enter any computer system. It adds nothing and it subtracts nothing from any computer system. Yet its deductive power is inestimable. In the hunt for hidden accounts, Greylist can reduce the set of pretty much every bank in the world to a tiny set of highly probable locations. The process takes around 5 to 6 weeks, depending on internet traffic. And as an aside, the arrival of the virus and lockdown has increased internet use by around 280%. Now, those of you with a bit of technical know-how may be interested to know that the positive results that we obtain are the ones that remain silent. Our legal counsel famously wrote in his opinion, Greylist obtains its intelligence from what it does not hear back. So our cutting-edge algorithm perfectly mimics the famous Sherlock Holmes case that was solved because of the dog that didn't bark. So let me recap Greylist technology. Let's be clear, no hacking, no data theft, no misuse of computers, no phishing, no passing off, no spoofing. Legal teams can use Greylist output reports to obtain disclosure orders through the courts. In just a few weeks, Greylist obtains key intelligence about where in the whole world black money has most likely been hidden. This intelligence helps clients to direct their scarce resources to where they're most likely to bear fruit. And this is why we say that Greylist is now the obvious and best starting point of every asset tracing assignment. I mean, to rewrite Mrs. Beaton's famous recipe for rabbit pie, we say, first catch your bank. Now, our business, Greylist Trace Limited, is a small tech startup company which opened for business just 18 months ago after securing an investment of 1.35 million from an EIS funder called Deepbridge Capital. Our aim, of course, is to conquer Everest. Why wouldn't it be? And I reckon we've made base camp. I mean, despite lockdowns and disruption, we've been working for blue chip law firms and investigators and forensic accountants all over the world. And we are especially proud to be strategic partners of ICC FraudNet. And we are currently in high-level discussions with UK government agencies to deploy the algorithm in the fight against economic crime, evasion, and corruption. I mean, I'd want to take a brief tackle a few cases that we've done that might give you a flavor of our geographical reach and some of the scale of the larger assignments. In one case, 2 Colombian criminals were the subject of a $4 billion freezing order linked to a cross-border drug smuggling investigation. And indeed, this investigation had been rolling on for years and years. But in just 6 weeks, Greylist identified 11 new banks, most of them in the Americas, and some of them unknown to the client. But one of the results was what you might call an outlier bank. It was found in Moscow, and this was certainly not something the client was expecting. And the other interesting feature of this particular case was that the client did not have any email addresses for their targets. So our in-house email search unit found several email addresses, which we then deployed against our global database of banks. And it's a feature of most of our cases that clients supply us with a certain number of email addresses which we then validate. We have developed sophisticated software that usually identifies a significant number of additional email addresses linked to a target. In a second case, we were instructed by a firm of investigators with a mandate from a Middle Eastern government to trace and recover several $billion in assets stolen by a criminal family group that had fled the country. We rather quickly identified 7 banks in 5 countries. Further work revealed even more banks, and legal action to recover these assets is ongoing. The other thing you should know is we've worked in many cases in the Far East and identified a significant number of banks in China, Hong Kong, Mongolia. In other words, I want to tell you that Greylist is a truly global technology. It works irrespective of language and location because it works above and beyond national borders and jurisdictions. We focus solely on email contacts with banks and so transcend the geographical constraints of traditional asset tracing. So just to sum up my little piece, since our launch 18 months ago, we have deployed around 500 million Greylist inquiries. To put this in perspective, the rate of positive results we've obtained from this vast deployment is in the region of 0.00001%. So returning to the theme of this discussion, only machines can do this job. Only machines can undertake the scale of data processing, or what might now be called data panning. I'll claim that. Our technology has been designed with a single purpose in mind: to find digital needles in terabyte-sized haystacks. Our team conceived and wrote the Greylist algorithm. We have the IP. And if you want to track down hidden bank accounts, we have the edge. We deliver all the banking relationships linked to a target's email address simultaneously at a fixed cost and within a fixed time scale, just a few weeks. So thanks for listening to my little intro to this discussion. I'm sure we'll broaden it out. I'm very excited to hear what the other guys have to say. And I'm going to hand you over to my friend and fellow panel member, Joe Sremack of BDO. Joe.
Thanks, Bob. And I want to echo some of the themes that you brought up. I think this is critical for any discussion of AI, and that is there are specific problems, given the volume of data we're facing, for which AI is, at this point, the only solution. AI itself is not a panacea. It's not a monolithic thing. It's a tool that we use in our toolbox. And so my perspective is coming from the nature of the matters we handle. At BDO, we're a global network of investigators, forensic accountants, and data analysts. My role is on the data analysis side. So my job is to take large volumes of data based on some set of information and ultimately arm the rest of our team and our partners at law firms, corporations and government entities with the information from that data. And having worked on this area for about 2 decades now, I'll say that AI, where it's at right now, is one of the most exciting times of the past 2 decades. And there is considerable sales hype around AI. So it's important to separate that sales hype from what is the actual impact of this technology. So talking specifically about hidden bank accounts, what you're typically working with on the data side are several discrete sets of data. You have the data from the subject. So you have a starting point, large data set that could range from several thousand records in a spreadsheet to hundreds of millions of transactions spread across ERP systems and other disparate systems. You have publicly available data, whether those are court judgments, whether those are leaked data sets or other public disclosures. And you're trying to make all this data work together to make it fit and tell a cohesive and complete story. And that's really the challenge. These can be analyzed without AI. If budget and time are no consideration, absolutely you can solve it. It might take considerable amounts of time, considerable amounts of staff, but it can be solved. So what AI really helps you do is solve those challenging data problems where you're facing constraints around time, most typically, or other factors involved in the analysis. So if you have the data, you can solve the problem. Given that this talk is centered around AI, we won't get into how do you acquire the data, but starting from once you have the data, what can you do with it utilizing AI? And saying AI is a lot like saying mathematics. There are different branches of mathematics. There are different applications of mathematics. You wouldn't apply a quadratic formula to solve something that requires geometric analysis. You apply AI for the right area, and it's also a very wide and complex field. So when you hear that a software has AI, that doesn't tell you much, right? That tells you, yes, there's something AI related in it, but it doesn't tell you the quality of it. It doesn't tell you the accuracy or how much it can solve. It may be a panacea, it may not. Ultimately, you need to understand that technology and how to apply it. So for us, what we do is we utilize a combination of commercial software packages that have AI, as well as our own homegrown AI. In the context of investigations, speed is everything. So that's why we rely heavily on commercial solutions. Standing up, testing, validating an AI solution on the fly often yields little results. So our goal is ultimately to get to those final results. That's why we'll make use of both commercial and pre-built AI solutions. And it is just a tool. In the course of our analysis, we'll take outputs from AI, do traditional analysis of it, feed it back into AI. It's all part of a process. And no two matters, whether it's an investigation or litigation, are the same. So you have to carefully select the tool you use and how you apply it to each of these matters. I want to give a couple case examples of how we apply it. One is a fairly standard one for us, and that's a general ledger type analysis. So if the subject has large volumes of general ledger data, you can run traditional fraud analysis on it, as well as do entity resolution. But if you utilize AI, there are packages out there now that will not only tell you, here are the high-risk areas, here are the key entities to analyze, but it'll tell you what's normal behavior within those accounts. And that for us is a great starting point, because we've already saved typically 800% of our time that we would have spent on that, getting to a place beyond where we could get with traditional methods alone. Taking that, we can then see patterns within each entity, whether that's a ledger account, the actual name of a resolved entity, such as a corporation or individual. And then we can start to compare those patterns to link those entities. Maybe there are two similar entities in terms of behavior. To the naked eye, they may not appear related, But when you run it through these algorithms, given the nature of the mathematics that it performs, it can find statistical relationships that you couldn't find otherwise. And for us, if we are doing ledger analysis, that is often how we start that. That gives us that leg up, that jump start, and helps us identify other red flags more quickly in the course of 1 week than we would have across months. The next part of it is that set of entity relationships. When it comes to tracing assets or trying to identify individual accounts, relationships are everything. The opponent in this is smart. They're not going to name things the same. Two entities might have very different names. They will not use the same addresses. So patterns in data are key to resolve some of those potential relationships. And again, give accountants and investigators and lawyers that information from which they can work. When you're dealing in millions of records of data, those relationships can't be identified in a spreadsheet. Even putting it into a database or other analytic tool, you will struggle to really get to the bottom of those relationships without this kind of tool. And then finally, entity relationships are difficult across disparate sets of data. If you have two different sets of data, they'll use different codings of those values, and it won't be obvious, even using traditional analytics methods, on what are the relationships. Are these two names identifying the same entity, or are they pointing to different ones? AI is another great tool for that part of the process. And then ultimately, once you get the results from those, you can continue the analysis. So the themes around AI are that it's a tool in a toolbox. It helps you expedite your analysis, and it gives you information that you may not find otherwise, but it's not going to solve every step of the process. There are parts where traditional analytics need to be used, and to date, there is not a unified panacea type AI solution. It's part of the process and an important one. And with that, I'll hand it off to Joey Friedmann to continue the discussion.
Thank you, Joe. My name is Joey Friedmann. I'm with LDM Global. We're a 24-year-old service provider that was started in London and now have data centers spanned across the world in Caribbean, Latin America, US, UK, Ireland, and Australia. More options coming soon. Our main focus is really on client experience, expertise, and innovation. And a lot of this has led into the area of AI. Covering a broad spectrum of the EDRM has afforded us the opportunity to be innovative and creative with some of the AI solutions that are out there. I'm going to echo a little bit what Joe was saying about AI being a broad term that covers a lot of spectrums. And typically, there's not a single path that you can say you're going to go this direction that is going to get you the result. AI to us is a lot about building a story with your data. Now, it helps to build that story where traditionally you would run keyword searches, you would review large amounts of data, you would begin gathering that information. And so AI can do some of that upfront work for you to help complete and help build that story. Databases, and there's a few out there, they connect to standard legal databases. I'm definitely not going to name drop, but there's plenty that are out there. They have personalities like people, and they have these different functions of AI that can help you build that story. They're pillars, if you will, that create a complete data set to help build that story. One of those is linguistic intelligence, right? This is either SVM, support vector machine learning, which is now turning into bidirectional learning. We won't get into the specifics of that, but that linguistic intelligence helps us understand the difference between text versus context of a document, because they're two very different things, right? This allows us to build what we call entities within the system. Now, not an entity in terms of what Joe was talking about, not an organization, but an entity to an AI engine. It's a person, it's a place, it's a thing, it's an email address, it's a bank account number. If you see where I'm going, it's a passport, it's a routing number. It is something where you can teach and validate the database to bring back certain sets of information. On top of that, you see classification and reference modeling that you can apply to the database. A lot of times people use relevant versus not relevant, or privileged versus not privileged, but we see these learning models that are coming into the system that can help expose certain sets of information, like bullying and toxic behavior, pulling out contracts, comments and appearance, kickbacks, insults, vulgar behavior, threatening behavior, suspicious activity, explicit comments, right? All of these learning algorithms that can bring forth certain sets of data that can help you start really building that story. Typically, what you think is going on is not what is always going on. People are very, very crafty. And the last part, and maybe one of the other pillars that gets us good sets of data that starts leading us to finding accounts is behavioral and emotional intelligence, right? What we would call the fraud triangle, right? Gauging pressure, intent, opportunity, rationalization within certain data sets, exposing the flaws in humans. And that's really a strong suit of AI. Additionally, you can look at social status, you can combine and merge the different organizations that you're finding in the database to get a complete data set that is building that story. It's helping you find the information that you would normally manually have to go into the database and do. So in essence, what artificial intelligence is doing is getting rid of that manual digging process. So we have a saying, and I am Texas, but they say if you give a man a fish, he'll eat for the day. But if you teach him to fish, he'll eat for a lifetime. And so when we look at what we are teaching these AI databases, is that it's something that can be used from case to case to case, right? So we teach it something like, what is an IBAN or an ISIN or a routing number? What is a bank statement, right? What is a brokerage statement versus a credit statement? And once you teach it that, it can come back in case after case, you can go find that information. So what it's doing in essence is it's going out and it's bringing you back that information. So you don't have to know the bank accounts you're looking for, right? The AI system knows what a bank account is, how to validate it, what the numbering scheme is, and it goes and it puts that information in front of you. In addition to AI systems like that, there are other systems that can track funds flow, do funds flow analysis in essence, right? So you would take your bank statements, brokerage statements, credit statements, and you can funnel them into a system. One of the issues, and we may get to some questions where we talk about this, is just the problem of text within data, right? And typically these statements tend to come in an image PDF format. They don't have good text. They could be degraded. They could be copies or scans, and you can't get good text out of it. There are applications that will actually use AI to OCR, put the statements, look at things from a transactional level, reconcile the statement for you, where you can categorize, you can tag with minimal intervention. And so it becomes really just shaving off all this manual intervention that you would normally have to do, and you're utilizing it, just like Joe said, just like Bob said, like it's a tool that you have that can automate and save you just countless hours, right? It accelerates your flow. In a litigation matter, that could be an acceleration of finding a strategy. From a claims matter, it gets you to your claim quicker, right? In an insolvency matter, get you that information, put it out in front of you. So in some AI, in summary, helps fill the gaps to build the story, to find accounts and other information with just less human intervention. Now, if you need something done, it's out there. You have to talk to people. You have to start asking around. I think I'll echo what Joe said. You want something that's validated. You want to work with someone that's been playing in the space a little bit, and someone that is able to validate their results. It's a hot item right now. We see a lot of people with a sales pitch into AI, and you definitely want to talk about how to validate results and be very specific in what you're looking for. AI is new. It's going to continue to grow. The options that you have are going to continue to increase. So we are about the mark where I believe that we can definitely take some audience questions if any are coming through. If not, as a group, we sat down and said, look, what are some questions that we would ask ourselves? We've got some very different yet very similar people on this call, and so. While we wait for any audience questions to come in, I'm going to throw a couple things around to the group to just get Joe, get your feedback, Bob, get your feedback. I may chime in. I talk a lot, so I can. So really, the first question is how should a company get started in evaluating AI solutions?
Yeah, so I think where we're seeing a lot of AI adoption happening is along the lines of automation as well. So when companies are identifying pain points, that is the number one entree into it. If you're seeing that in certain stages of your investigations, your litigation matters, there's an area where it's just going too slow, or there's information you're not getting out of that part of the process, that's where I think it's time to talk to AI providers, whether that be directly with those companies or others in that area. Bob, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think that I would like to bring it back to the point that I made. I think that listening to you guys, what I found really interesting is this idea that when you're dealing with big data, the pattern, what you're essentially doing is you're finding patterns that we couldn't possibly be aware of if it weren't for the kind of analysis that you guys do. I'd like to ask you guys a question. How does what you've just been describing, how does that actually feed back into a case that ends up finding bank accounts that then ends up going to court? I'm assuming that this all boils down and becomes a focus for some specific investigation where finding bank accounts is, of course, crucial.
It does, Robert. It does. Part of our, when we're building these entities, is taking a set of data. You only have the information you have in front of you, right? And a lot of times, you end up in an information chasing exercise, right? So when I say build a story, I think you have to build a complete story in order to get to those hidden bank accounts. You don't know what you don't know, right? So when you do build that story and you get all the bank account numbers that are in your data set and you put that in front of you, and you start looking at the different actors, and you start using these different AI functions within the database, things become clearer and apparent, and you can do that without a lot of human interaction, utilizing some of these AI systems. Second question, kind of to branch off that, are there any good resources for searching for AI solutions? Are there any resources out there?
Yeah, there are countless AI resources, and I think for AI, what you want to do is find that niche that applies to you. There's so many different areas, pharmaceutical, healthcare, but in the context of the investigation world, you do want to make sure that you're getting that information that's pertinent to this group. Some resources, LinkedIn is a great resource. There are a number of groups in this space focused on AI where you can just pose a general question. You'll get great feedback. You'll also get some sales pitches, but those are excellent ways to get the information. And to get really good, anonymous, unbiased information, Fishbowl, the community networking site, actually is probably the most valuable resource to give you honest feedback on solutions.
You mentioned, Joey, about in some of your discussion about IBAN numbers and bank account numbers. Of course, in a sense, we aren't going anywhere near that in order to obtain the intelligence. As I've described, we aren't inside the banking system. Our algorithm is making a deduction from outside. But where do you get hold of these bank account numbers? I mean, is this? I presume this is legally obtained. It's something that's fed to you in order for you to do your analysis.
Yeah, in most all cases, that's our data that we're looking through. Searching for money movement, right, really is the key that leads us to find those bank accounts, right, which leads us to find the directors or owners of those accounts, or at least gives us some type of simulation of who that is, right? So by finding all the documents where you see the movement of money, right? That's why we have entities that bring back ISINs, IBANs, CUSIPs, routing numbers, AI algorithms that go out and find bank statements, brokerage statements. You have to build that picture, right? You have to see where the money is, where it's moving to, right? And from there, you can either use a logic of deduction that says, okay, well, money's moving here to here, but where is this money over here? How much money are we actually missing? Which leads us to, call someone like you, Bob, and say, look, we've got some suspicion. We need to run some names through. Something is going somewhere. We know that. And it's a matter of, starting to ping these accounts to go find that information, right? And sometimes that leads to simple further information, right? Sometimes the data set that you start out with, it needs completion, right? I think one of the programs that we work with shows you where the gaps are, and knowing where the gaps of information or knowing where you don't have account statements can be just as important as the ones that you do have. Yeah, absolutely. So I think it definitely works both ways. What are, just kind of question to the group, moving on, what are some of the pitfalls when working with AI solutions? It sounds like a bucket of gold and it's going to solve everyone's problem, but what are some of the downsides to that, in your opinion?
Joe?
There are a few. I think the first one is the validation of it. If this AI is acting as a black box, especially in the context of any kind of court action, you need to be able to prove how it got from point A to point B with the output. That's the biggest initial obstacle. The other is one that's hot in the news right now, and that is the bias. When you're working with certain AI solutions, those have been trained based on some existing data set. And if that data set is biased, and that doesn't necessarily mean discriminatory, but it could be biased to give you false positives based on financial transactions, that bias can really, really harm your analysis and, again, lead to false positives or false negatives. In the context where we're talking about, false negatives are the biggest risk. Bob, what do you think?
Well, it's interesting you should say that, because I suppose because I'm not a software man. I'm essentially just punting the Greylist algorithm. But one of the things that's really struck us is, I mentioned it a bit, and that part of the problem that we're facing is that there's been huge pressure on the internet. I don't know if you guys, I'd be really interested to know whether this has happened to you, because obviously we tell our clients that we're going to do this and it's going to take so long. And if anything, our technology is getting better. The times are falling for us to find the information, the algorithms speeding around the world, doing what it's doing, only to find that there are these significant internet outages, which are purely linked to this vast increase. I mean, here we all are using algorithm and technology this is how this is happening. And of course, that's creating a huge pressure on the whole of the provision of the internet. So that again starts to throw out some of, we have to be very careful, because a lot of our algorithmic activity is based on speed, on a timing mechanism. And if you've got outages, that does create some problems. So we are, but we're getting around it. But I don't, have you experienced any of this in your work?
I think, when it comes to algorithms, like you're running, Bob, I think it's already tuned, right? You're accomplishing a single goal. When it comes to some of the other AI systems, classification methods, reference models, even the entity extraction that you see doing, it's not something that you can just fire away and it's good. It has to be tuned and tweaked towards your data set. So there's no single database that I personally have worked with, or my company has worked with, where we've just fired something off and it was good to go, right? There is some wrench turning, there is some human input that needs to be had that helps tune that. So the system will go out, it will find some stuff, but you've got to validate it, you've got to rank it, you've got to teach it a little bit about your data set. So typically, and we talk to clients and we've got a set list of custom models that, we can put into a database, still have to turn the wrenches, you still got to go in and you still got to tweak, or it could turn into a bad AI system. I think, Joe said the false positives, the false negatives can be extremely, extremely harmful. We've got a couple minutes left. I'll ask one more question, and then we'll thank everyone for joining us. But a quick summary of where has AI had the most impact for you and your clients? Really good question for both you and Joe and Bob.
Joe?
It's been a few areas. I would say the most impactful are those types of activities that we could do, but were becoming overly time consuming given data complexity, data volume, where we had been dealing in tens of millions of records, going into billions of records now. AI has revolutionized how we structure our projects, how we lay out timelines and ultimately deliver. So being methodical and careful in how we apply it has yielded great time savings benefits. Again, with analytics, traditional methods applied throughout the process.
Yeah, I would say the same. I mean, I suppose I've made the point in a sense. It's incredible what the Greylist algorithm can do. I mean, it's speeding around the world as we speak. Billions, of packets going out in order for us to essentially make a discrimination that only a machine could make. Taking the point about the problems of algorithms, I mean, it is all about standard deviations. And I picked Joey's point up. I want to pay homage to my team up in Sheffield, who are making sure that the quality of our product is maintained despite the discrepancies that you talk about. Yes, you definitely have to have human input at some point. But what this algorithm is actually doing, it just boggles the mind that we can the discrimination that we are making in time in order to assess to create a binary algorithm, a yes or a no, is incredible, and that is going to change the world, I think.
Definitely, really good. So to my two panelists, Joe Sremack and Bob Duffield, and on behalf of myself, Joseph Friedman, we thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for listening. I would encourage anyone, if you have any questions or you want to dig a little deeper, to contact BDO or Greylist or LDM Global. Have a meeting with us, talk a little bit, see if we have a solution that fits you.
Thank you all. Thank you very much for watching. Nice to meet you.
Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to our investigative news and documents service and attending our events. For more information, visit offshorealert.com.